Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack what has to be one of the most chilling, absolutely perplexing, unsolved mysteries in all of human history. We're looking at a deeply unsettling event where 9 people lost their lives in a single night. And honestly, to this day, nobody truly knows why. We're heading way deep into the frozen wilderness to examine the Dyatlov Pass mystery. Together, we'll walk through the exact facts, the timeline, and the, frankly, bizarre evidence left behind on the snowy slopes of the Ural Mountains. To really wrap our heads around the sheer isolation of this event, we've got to drop ourselves right into the setting. The year is 1959. We are in the Ural Mountains. This is a massive, unforgiving mountain range, and it is the dead of winter. You have to remember, there are no cell phones, no GPS, absolutely no quick helicopter rescues if things go sideways out here. It's just remote, snow-covered slopes, this biting, relentless wind, and an incredibly harsh, freezing wilderness. This pitch-black, isolated backdrop, this is where our entire explainer unfolds. Section 1. The setup, a routine expedition gone wrong. You know, every mystery usually starts with a baseline of normalcy, right? Well, here, that baseline is 9 individuals who set up camp on that remote slope. What started out as a perfectly routine expedition ended in absolute disaster. And to understand why, we first need to look at who was actually out there on this mountain. These definitely weren't amateurs. They weren't weekend tourists who just took a wrong turn in the woods. No, these were 9 highly experienced hikers. The group was led by a guy named Igor Dyatlov, and he was known as a seriously skilled and respected trek leader. They knew the snow, they knew the cold, and they knew how to survive in it. They made their camp on the slope, and by all accounts, everything seemed completely, perfectly routine. So, if we trace the path of this expedition, it all begins with their departure into that brutal winter wilderness of 1959. They actually make really good time, establishing their camps along the route without a hitch. But then, we hit the fateful night. Something happens here. Something that completely shatters that routine. Weeks go by, and rescue teams finally arrive. Now, when those rescuers reached the campsite, they were expecting a pretty straightforward recovery. Or, maybe to find the hikers sheltering from a bad storm. But what they actually found? It made absolutely no sense. Section 2. The baffling rescue scene. I mean, just imagine being on that rescue team. You've hiked miles through these punishing conditions, you finally spot the camp on the slope, and as you get closer, the scene just defies all logic. And this brilliantly illustrates the core contradiction of this entire mystery. On one hand, we have to remember exactly who these people were: experienced, skilled trekkers. They knew, without a doubt, that their tent and their gear were their absolute lifelines. Yet, the rescue team discovers that the tent had been cut open. But get this, not from the outside. It had literally been sliced open from the inside. And the footprints in the snow, they told a story of sudden, sheer, unadulterated panic. These expert survivalists had fled their shelter, running out into the freezing darkness totally barefoot and barely dressed. To really grasp the gravity of that split-second decision, consider the brutal reality of negative 30 degrees Celsius. That is deeply, intensely lethal cold. To survive in that kind of extreme environment, you need heavy layers, insulated boots, and shelter. Period. Yet those footprints clearly showed 9 people running out into a negative 30-degree night, leaving all their gear behind. Whatever was inside, or maybe immediately outside that tent, frightened them so badly that facing a guaranteed freezing death in the pitch black somehow felt like the safer option. Section 3. Disturbing forensic anomalies. So why on earth would they run? To figure that out, investigators had to take a really hard look at the bodies themselves. Following those frantic footprints away from the tent and down toward the tree line, the rescue teams made their first truly grim discovery. 2 of the victims were found near the forest, half naked and completely frozen to death. Now, this aligns with the deadly temperatures we just talked about, but honestly, it only raised a ton more questions. I mean, where were the others? The search continued, expanding farther out into this brutal, unforgiving terrain. And as the remaining bodies were found much farther away, well, the mystery deepened significantly. The internal injuries were just catastrophic. We're talking massive cracked ribs and major skull fractures. It was akin to the extreme physical damage you'd normally expect to see from a high-speed car crash. But externally, almost no wounds at all. There was no massive bruising on the skin, no lacerations that could possibly explain the completely crushed bones underneath. I mean, think about it. How does a human body sustain such catastrophic internal injuries without the skin being heavily damaged? And right in the middle of all these completely baffling injuries, there was one detail that stands out as deeply, profoundly unsettling. When the investigators examined the bodies, they found that one of the female hikers was actually missing her tongue. It is a highly specific, totally horrific detail that just does not easily fit into any standard model of exposure or, typical mountain accidents. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the introduction of a completely unexpected variable: radiation. Yes, you heard that right. Later forensic analysis actually detected traces of radioactive material on some of the victims' clothing. Let's just pause and think about that for a second. We are out in the remote wilderness in 1959. You do not just naturally stumble into radioactive material on a weekend hiking trip. This single piece of evidence completely shatters the idea that this was just some simple natural disaster.
Section 4. Theories and unanswered questions.
So, faced with this overwhelming and wildly contradictory mountain of evidence, the cut tent, the massive internal injuries without external marks, the missing tongue, the radioactive clothing, investigators had to find some kind of answers. First, they looked at and then completely ruled out the most logical explanation: an avalanche. They found absolutely zero clear evidence of one. The angle of the slope wasn't right, the snow patterns didn't match up. Okay, so second, what about foul play? Maybe they were ambushed out there. But again, the investigation found no signs of an attack by other humans or even animals. The footprints in the snow belonged exclusively to the 9 hikers. There was simply no one else out there. Faced with facts that simply defied any natural explanation, the official investigation eventually had to issue a ruling. So the crucial point is this official conclusion. The investigators formally concluded that the deaths were caused by an unknown compelling force. Think about the sheer gravity of those words, sitting in an official government report: unknown compelling force. It is incredibly vague, and yet it carries this chilling finality. It is essentially an official admission that whatever happened on that mountain slope was entirely beyond their comprehension. Because the official conclusion was so completely open-ended, several prevailing theories emerged over the years to fill the void. Given those traces of radiation we talked about, many people believe this was a secret military experiment gone wrong. Closely related to that is the theory of an undisclosed weapons test that the hikers maybe accidentally witnessed or perhaps got caught in the blast radius of. That at least might explain the massive internal injuries with no external trauma. And finally, just because the evidence is so incredibly disjointed and bizarre, some suspect that the truth might be something far stranger, something entirely beyond human understanding. Now, we're not taking sides on any of these theories, but this is exactly what the source material points to when trying to make sense of the senseless. All of which leaves us staring at the very same blank, snowy canvas that those rescuers faced back in 1959. 9 incredibly capable people, a shredded tent, panicked barefoot footprints in the snow, inexplicable injuries, and radioactive traces. We've walked through the facts, the timelines, and the theories straight from the records of this case, but it all ultimately leads right back to this final, lingering question: what really happened in the dark? It remains one of history's most chilling unsolved mysteries, and a pretty stark reminder of how quickly human life can be erased by forces we simply do not understand. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.